now and then I get to go to Southern Min. Generally, it's the third week in February where I spend the whole week in southern Minnesota during the winter. I call it the Southern Wheat Tour. It's kind of like Lynyrd Skynyrd kind of deal. I'm on the road, Southern Wheat Tour. So we do, but I have yield trials there too. And I'm not gonna bore you with basically what that program looks like. But just some quick stats. 5 locations, attendance tends to be down. COVID really changed in-person extension. And I am a person that really loves one-on-one and small groups. To me, learning and teaching is a full contact sport. I do Zoom, but to me, the one-on-one interaction works for me. I'm old school in that way. I don't know how to get you back into this room. You're here, but some of your colleagues are not. I don't know how to change that again after COVID, but we really see this, what I call a COVID hangover in extension. Summer plot tours, basically that's where some of the yield trial locations are. Attendance is down 50% as well. And then I have the yield trials, and I planned these. So I go literally down all the way to Rochester. The expenses that we have, most of it is mileage. Now you go like, Wiersma, you're in Crookston. Why on God's green earth are you going all the way down to Rochester? Well, it's because how I'm organized. The way the equipment that I have makes it much, much easier than having my colleagues from St. Paul campus make it down to Rochester. I can do it faster than they can, even though I have to drive further. And that's just, you've given me the tools to do that. I use GPS, a bunch of other things. They're not at that same level. And basically, we're substitutions for the ROCs. Morris, for instance, if you didn't know, as an ROC, as a Research and Outreach Center, has gone completely organic. They no longer will do, and that happened this winter, do standard yield trials the way they've done them for 80 plus years. So Benson is the alternate site for it. Now, any questions on how I spend time in Southern Min? By the way, 10% of the acres of wheat, spring wheat, is in Southern Min. Anything basically south of I-94 is pretty much Southern Min. If not, things I talk about, variety selection, crop management, pest management, fertility management, and the bigger picture. And so I'm going to bore you now with a talk that I gave all of last winter that I don't think I used in the northern part of my talks. And I called it the law of unintended consequences. There's a lot of hubbub about soil health, right? And one of the buzzwords that you read, regenerative agriculture. It curls my toes to a point where I can't walk. Some of those terms. What is soil health? Well, there's umpteen definitions, but I think the most concise and the one that probably has some consensus behind it in the scientific community is the continued capacity of the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. It's probably the most concise and where there's some consensus. Well, what is that living thing? What is the soil biota? Anything you can find in it. And there's lots of fun things in there. The bacteria, the fungi, some of them good, some of them bad, but they're part of the whole thing. There's spiders, there's earthworms, everything that we can find in that top 12 inches. Now I'm going to be the cynical bastard. I'm allowed to be a cynical bastard now. I started maybe out as being a cynical bastard because I got trained by Bob Bush, who was a master at cynicism. I have a couple of questions for you. I'm not going to read them out loud, just scan them over, and then think of what the answer is to each of those. Okay, how many of you want to answer the first three with yeses or with nos? So you can have 3 yeses and 3 nos. How many of you have 3 yeses? How many of you have 3 nos? No, there's no buts allowed. That's a scientific cop-out in some cases. I think if you only are allowed to do yeses and nos, in my opinion, the first 3 can be answered all with a no, a really hard no. That's somewhat scary if you think in this discussion. The last one, how resilient are these communities, that soil biota that we talk about? How resilient do you think they are? Way more resilient than you think. How long does, and just to give you an illustration, everybody of you that has grown corn has heard about fallow syndrome, right? How long does the fallow syndrome in corn last in the valley? Given a year, maybe 2-3 weeks. Can you find it at the end of the season when you run the combine through it? More often than not, no. What does that mean? Those communities are very, very resilient. The mycorrhizal community that basically is absent of partially degraded because you had a fallow year, the corn and the mycorrhiza get together again early in the season. Initially there isn't enough, which is what instigates the fallow syndrome. The corn is just going like, I'm not happy here. And then all of a sudden, that community kicks into gear, and by the end of the season, more often than not, you don't find a difference in yield. Now, like with seed treatments, Austin said, yeah, we can find a difference in the beginning. But at the end of the season, the differences are much smaller or non-statistical. So things are much more dynamic than you think, and it's not that our soils, that we've degraded our soils to where these things are no longer working. One of the things we have to remember in some of these debates. So, why are we talking about soil health? Is it like bell bottoms? Just something fancy to talk about? Are we losing productivity? I don't think we are really, truly losing productivity. We haven't degraded our soils to the point that the wheels have come off. So is it really a proxy for a larger issue? I have to go back now a step and talk about ecosystem services. It's another term, and this term is actually very well defined in the scientific literature. And there's a key point that often there's 2 words that often get left out when people talk about ecosystem services. Ecosystem services is still defined as the benefit to us, not to the ecosystem. The benefits to us providing a healthy ecosystem. It ignores the ecosystem in of itself. It still talks about benefits to us. in a healthy relationship, offering such things as natural pollination, clean air, extreme water mitigation, human mental and physical well-being. That Springfield does not care, okay, about your mental well-being. Yet we define ecosystem services as the benefits to us. So there's two questions there, and we, in the interest of time, are not going to answer them. But I want you to really think about this. Because the electorate at large, giving the definition above, is wanting to have a say in how we manage our landscape. Think about those questions for the rest of the day. So, now a really dirty secret. Everybody talks about cover crops. Why? Well, in southern Maine, there's nitrates running off the fields. Mississippi, the Minnesota River Valley, we have rules now about how we manage nitrogen across the field landscape, fall versus spring applied. They're all intended to reduce nitrate runoffs. We have nitrate runoff. We have a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Plain and simple. Now, the problem with cover crops is if you remove them too early, which we mostly do, it doesn't help one iota. We're playing in the margin. We're not truly changing the runoff because the runoff mostly happens in May and June. In southern Maine, not here. A little bit different. So you have to establish the cover crops. In the fall, things are relatively easy and quiet, proportionally. So winter rye, which is the darling of the cover crop industry, can sequester nitrates. It does. But it does most of that in June when the growth really starts happening, in May and June. But we terminate it by then, especially in the corn system, in the corn side of things. And you have to have a fair amount of biomass. You have to really establish it very early if you want to sequester nitrates in the fall. So to me, in Minnesota, especially in southern Maine, is cover crops, is winter rye a Band-Aid on an arterial bleed? I don't get very popular when I say that. I've had people call me saying, you're not very well, you're not a team player. And I go, look at the data. Yeah, but, no, look at the data. I didn't make up that data. It's not my data. I didn't cook the books. These are the conversations we have to have. Now, on top of that, rye is an alternate host for a couple things that matter to me. Barley yellow dwarf, Hessian fly, things like that. So basically, we can skip this. Let's go faster. I want to get to Plan B. I don't want to get into the weeds on Hessian fly, although we can get into the weeds very quickly. Plan B, and this is to me is the crux in southern Maine. We need to widen the rotation for a number of reasons. And rather than using Band-Aids like winter rye, let's just treat it as a crop, whether it's winter rye or winter wheat. Putting winter annuals on the landscape can change a whole bunch of things for them. A little bit less pertinent here, but some of the key points are the same. We need to change the rotations, especially in the corn-soybean system. And rather than thinking of small grains as just a cost, let's treat it as a commodity and treat it as a crop. because now I can harvest some of those ecosystem services effectively. So that's how I stir the pot in Southern Maine. Any questions?